For generations, the world has looked at India and seen the same story: overcrowded streets, poverty, and a nation struggling to catch up. A country filled with potential but always held back by inefficiency and corruption. But that image is outdated. Today, India is rising faster than almost any country on Earth. Its economy is expanding at record speed. Its tech industry is booming, and its military is becoming one of the strongest in the world. By 2030, India's economy is expected to surpass Japan and Germany. Some experts even believe it could challenge the US and China in the coming decades. Everything seems to be going in India's favor. But what if beneath this rapid rise, cracks are already forming? Despite its incredible success, India faces a hidden challenge that could bring everything crashing down. A problem not from the outside, but from within. So how did India transform from a struggling post-colonial state into a rising global power? And can it overcome its greatest obstacle before it's too late? This is the rise of India. India's transformation didn't happen overnight. Just a few decades ago, it was one of the poorest countries in the world, struggling with deep economic stagnation and widespread poverty. When India gained independence from British rule in 1947, it inherited a broken economy. Centuries of colonial exploitation had drained its resources, leaving behind failing industries, weak infrastructure, and a population with little access to education or opportunity. The Indian government attempted to rebuild, but its economic policies did more to stifle growth than encourage it. Following socialist ideals, industries were placed under heavy state control, and the strict bureaucratic system, known as the license Raj, made it nearly impossible for private businesses to expand. For decades, India remained isolated from the global economy. Trade was restricted, foreign investment was discouraged, and industries struggled under government control. While India achieved self-sufficiency in food production, its economic growth lagged behind other rising nations like South Korea and China. By the late 1980s, the cracks were showing. India was running out of money. Inflation was skyrocketing, unemployment was rising, and foreign reserves had dropped so low that the government could barely afford to import oil. Then in 1991, disaster struck. India faced an economic crisis so severe that it was forced to seek an emergency bailout from the International Monetary Fund. But the bailout came with a condition. India had to open up its economy to the world. What followed was one of the most dramatic economic transformations in modern history. For the first time, foreign companies were allowed to invest in India. Trade barriers were lowered, private industries were encouraged to grow. It was a turning point that would change everything. In just a few years, India's economy didn't just recover, it exploded into one of the fastest growing in the world. But this was only the beginning. What happened next wasn't just recovery, it was an economic revolution. The 1991 crisis forced India to open its economy, but no one could have predicted how fast it would grow. For the first time, global corporations flooded in, eager to tap into India's massive workforce and untapped market potential. Trade barriers were lifted, private businesses flourished, and new industries emerged almost overnight. Within a few years, India became the world's back office. With a young English-speaking workforce and significantly lower labor costs, multinational companies rushed in to set up call centers, IT services, and business outsourcing hubs. Cities like Bangalore and Hyderabad became the backbone of global tech support, serving clients from the United States to Europe. It was a win-win. Foreign companies saved billions, while millions of Indians found stable, well-paying jobs in the private sector for the first time. The middle class expanded, and economic mobility became possible on a scale never seen before. But outsourcing was only the first step. As India's workforce grew, so did its ambitions. By the early 2000s, global manufacturers turned their attention to India. With wages still lower than China's, it became the next big destination for large-scale production. Automobile companies, pharmaceutical giants, and industrial plants poured in billions, setting up massive factories. India was no longer just providing services, it was making high-value products. The economy boomed. Foreign investment skyrocketed. And for the first time, India's middle class wasn't just growing, it was reshaping the country. But there was a problem. India's economic rise was built on foreign investment. And while the country was producing more than ever, most of the profits weren't staying in India. Some economists warned that this model wouldn't be enough to make India a true economic superpower. For years, India had been seen as a place for outsourcing work, not creating world-changing technology. But that perception was fading fast. Tech giants like Google, Microsoft, and Tesla weren't just hiring Indian talent anymore. They were setting up research hubs, engineering labs, and innovation centers inside the country. India was no longer just producing technology. It was leading the next wave of global breakthroughs. And at the same time, India's space agency was achieving what once seemed impossible. It had already stunned the world by reaching Mars on its first attempt, something no other nation had done. Then in 2023, India became the first country to land on the moon's south pole, cementing its status as a rising space power. And this rapid rise wasn't just benefiting corporations, it was lifting millions out of poverty. Between 2005 and 2022, India achieved the largest reduction in global poverty ever recorded, pulling over 415 million people into the middle class. Wages increased, infrastructure improved, and opportunities expanded. But despite all this success, one massive challenge remained. India still lacked its own global business giants. Many of India's biggest success stories like Amazon, Google, and Apple weren't Indian at all. Unlike China, which developed Huawei, Alibaba, and Tencent, India still relied heavily on foreign capital and innovation. And that reliance created a ceiling on how far India's rise could go. Because to truly become a global superpower, India needed more than just foreign investment. It wasn't just trying to change its economy. As its wealth and industries expanded, so did its ambitions. It was no longer just an emerging market, it was becoming a major world player. For most of its history, India's military was focused on defense rather than global influence. But that is changing fast. Today, India has the fourth largest military in the world, and it's expanding at an unprecedented rate. Its defense budget has more than doubled in the past decade, and the country is rapidly modernizing its army, navy, and air force. India isn't just growing its military, it's gaining influence on the world stage. As a key player in G20 and BRICS alliance, it's strategically balancing relationships between the West, Russia, and its neighbors. But India's growing power hasn't gone unnoticed. As tensions with China and Pakistan escalate, the country is rapidly strengthening its military presence along its borders. New alliances are forming, defense spending is skyrocketing, and the world is starting to take notice. India is no longer just rising, it is preparing for something bigger. But can its rapid rise continue? Could one hidden challenge bring it all crashing down? India's rise has been nothing short of extraordinary. Its economy is booming, its global influence is growing, and many believe it could challenge the world's superpowers in the coming decades. But history has seen this before, nations that rose fast, only to collapse under their own success. Economists call it the middle income trap, a point where rapid expansion stalls, wages stagnate, and progress grinds to a halt. Unlike China, which built global giants like Huawei and Alibaba, India's biggest industries are still controlled by foreign corporations. Its tech boom, fueled by Google and Microsoft, its manufacturing surge, driven by Apple and Tesla. Foreign investment has fueled India's rise, but also created a dangerous dependency. When outside companies dominate key industries, profits don't stay in India, they leave. And economic dependence isn't the only threat. India is more divided than ever. With 1.4 billion people, its vast diversity has long been a strength. But today, tensions are rising. Religious clashes, political divisions, and mass protests are fueling instability. And history has shown, when a nation turns against itself, progress stalls. India's rapid urbanization has already left millions behind. The rich-poor gap is widening, and if inequality continues to grow, so will unrest. To truly rise, India needs more than economic power, it needs unity. Because right now, India is at a crossroads. Will it rise to become a global superpower? Or will the very forces that propelled its success become the reason for its downfall?